Hi, in this video I'm going to demonstrate working with App Inventor 2 and how to work with multiple image sprites and how to get them to do different things. So you'll notice here we have 5 fish image sprites and they're all going different directions and have slightly different speeds and angles that they are moving. So we're going to look at a technique that's used quite often in order to accomplish this. It's a common design pattern that you may run into when setting up some different games. So I'm going to start by going into App Inventor and we'll get the layout set up. Okay, so here in App Inventor I just have a brand new project created. I haven't added anything to it yet. So my screen was set up to be landscape view. So the first thing I'm going to do is come in here and change my screen orientation so that it was landscape. And in order to have image sprites, we need to have a canvas. So if I go to drawing and animation, I'm going to drag a canvas out in here. And I want it to stretch the entire width and height of the screen. So I'm just going to change the height to fill parent and the width to fill parent. And I want to add that background image of the ocean in there. So I'm going to choose a background image and upload a file that I've already got set up. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to add are image sprites. So I'm going to drag over 5 little sprites and I want to rename them just because it is useful to have things that have more meaningful names. So I'm just going to call it like fish 1 and then fish 2 and 3. So I'm going to pause and finish renaming these. Okay, so I've renamed them. Now, normally you might come in here and decide to set up a picture. And since all of mine are using the same image, I would have to come into each fish and set up the image, which isn't hard. I would just come in and upload my file and let me say it's the clownfish and okay. All right, so I've got that set up and I can repeat that for each of the other ones. And that will work perfectly fine. But what if later on you decided you wanted to switch it to a different image? It's not too bad for 5, but say I had 10 different fish or 15 different fish in here, and I decided to change the image. That means that I would have to come into each one of these and set it up to use the image. So if I deleted this, it would delete it from all of these image sprites. So I'm going to show you a way that we can set the image for all of these images when the screen loads. So I'm going to change this one and I'm just going to change this back to none. And for the app that I'm developing, just for this example, there really isn't anything else I need to set up in the properties or in our designer view. So I'm going to go into the blocks view. Okay, and what we're going to do, now we've got fish 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Now we could come in and say, okay, when the screen initializes, we could say fish 1, set fish 1 picture 2, and then add text in here, and then put in the name of the image, which is clownfish.png. And then I could duplicate that for fish 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Well, let me see what this does right now for what our screen looks like when we test it. Okay, so when it initializes, we have our single fish. But again, repetition in here, duplicating things over and over again, often can be done in a simpler format. So let's try, I'm going to pull this out of here and demonstrate a slightly different way. So to begin with, we're going to create a list of our fish sprites. So we need a variable to set up, and I'm going to call my variable name fish list, and we're going to initialize it as an empty list. So under the list blocks, we'll do create an empty list. Then when we initialize the screen, we're going to add stuff into our list. So when it initializes, let's add items to our list. And the list we want to add them to is our fish list. And we're going to have 5 items, right? We have 5 fish, so we're going to have 5 items in here. So I'm going to click on the mutator button over here, and we'll just add more items until we have a total of 5, right? And then I can just click that mutator button again to shrink it back. So next, we're going to add our items in here. So I'm going to click on fish 1 sprite. All the way at the bottom of the list is fish 1. Now I could go into fish 2 and grab that, but it would be just as fast to duplicate this block and snap them in, and then I can just change it to fish 2 and 3 and 4 and so forth. So we'll say 2, 3, 4, and 5. So now we have a list called fish list that contains our 5 sprites. It might seem a little time consuming or a little backwards to create an empty list and then populate it when we initialize the screen, but when we have a list that contains a component, right, our sprites, our components, we have to do it this way. We can't just initialize and populate with components. And that's just the way App Inventor is set up. Okay, now we have a list, and we can come through and loop through everything in this list and do something to it. So first thing we'll do is loop through it and set the pictures. So I'm going to come into the control block and grab, we have a nice loop here that works with a list. For each item in the list, do something. So we're going to say for each item in list, and we have to specify the list, which is our global fish list. Right, and we wanted to set the image for all of these sprites to the clownfish image. Now here when we did it, we had to say fish 1, and we would have to duplicate that and say fish 2 and fish 3. We can accomplish that over here with one block of code. But how can we do that for 5 different fish? Well, there's this any component. You may not have seen this before or worked with it at all, but when we have multiple components, we can click on the plus sign to expand it. And as soon as we added the canvas, we got an any component canvas. And when we added the first sprite, we got any image sprite. So now we can sort of treat these all as one big group. So we can say any image sprite, and I'll scroll down here and find any image sprite. We can set image sprite picture of component. Well, our component is the item. And what do we want to set it to? Clownfish JPG. So let's look at this for a second and just analyze how this is going to work. This goes into the global fish list, which we initialized here with these 5 components. So it's going to start here with fish 1. So for each item in the list, it starts, it goes, okay, fish 1. Fish 1, set the picture of item. This item matches this item. So fish 1 is item when the loop starts. So that means it's going to say this is fish 1, set to clownfish PNG. That's the end of the loop. Comes back up. Are there more things in the global fish list? Yes, there's item 2. Okay, so now fish 2, set the picture to clownfish PNG. Comes back up. Is there anything else in the list? Yes, fish 3. Sets fish 3. Keeps going. Once it finishes with fish 5 and setting the clownfish, it comes back and it says, is there anything else in the list? Nope. Fish 5 was the last in the list, so then that loop ends. So let's see what it looks like running on our device. Okay, so here are the fish. So what is the benefit of doing this again? Well, if I decided to use a different image, I could just come in here and change it in one place without having to come back in here and go into each individual sprite and choose my picture. But either technique would work. So next, what can we do with randomizing the movement of the fish? Well, we could do the same thing here in our loop. In addition to assigning the picture, we can tell it to change the speed and the heading of the sprites. Now I can come back over here to any component again and choose any image sprite. And I can say, well, set image sprite heading of component, get item. Remember here, item represents the item in the list as it's going through. So again, when it's going through here and it's fish 1, then this is fish 1 and this is fish 1. So we're going to set the heading of it to, now let's do something random because we don't want them all going in the same direction at the same time. So for random values, I'm going to go into the math block and let's do a random integer, a random number, whole number. And we'll say from, let's do 1 to 360. So let's see how that works. Okay, so they're kind of in a different direction. We're saying we changed the heading. You can see right before they were all facing straight horizontally, but now they have different heading, but now there's no motion. So we have to also give them a speed. So let's come in, again, I could come over here and change it here, or I'm going to save myself a little bit of work and duplicate this because I do want to use the item component and I do want a random number. So I'm just going to change this to speed, and I'm going to change my speed from 2 to maybe 9. And again, I'm going to reset my connection and start it up again because this is all in the screen initialize. Okay, now my fish are moving different directions, different times, different speeds, but you'll notice when it gets to the edge, they just kind of stop and slide around there. So we need to do something to tell them what to do when they hit an edge. I can get rid of this block of code since we took care of that in here. Now, unfortunately, we can't detect when a sprite reaches the edge of the screen in our loop. So we need an event handler for each one of our fish. So this isn't too bad, even if we had 20 or 30 different fish. It would just take you a little bit of time, but we would say when fish 1 edge reached, what do we want it to do when it reaches the edge? We want it to bounce. And what is the edge? We want to get the edge that it hit. Now in this case, we don't need to do anything with it. We're just going to get the value, but we could check to see if it was the right or the left or the top or the bottom. So let's see, what is that doing anything? Yeah, this must be fish 1 because it's hitting the edge and it's bouncing off of it. So again, through the magic of duplication here, I would say when fish 2 edge reached, call fish 2 bounce. And then I'll just duplicate this. I'm getting the error messages because you can't use the same event handler twice for the same component. So I'm just going to change this to make sure when 3 edge reached, we call fish 3 bounce, and duplicate it again for fish 4, and then duplicate it again for fish 5. And then we'll check, see what it's doing on our device. All right, so now when they hit an edge, they're bouncing off, right? They're heading in random directions, a random speed for different ones. And you could certainly take this one and start to build off of it for several other different types of games. You know, we could introduce things like sharks or other predators every so often based on a clock timer. You could have food, so when they collide with a worm or some other little speck of food, they could get points. So it's just the beginning of what you could do for multiple different types of game setups. But this is a common, again, this is a common design pattern and a way that you can go in and start to set up something like this using a looping structure.